Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to be practicing writing articles. Now, before we start, we're also going to talk about some strategies for writing articles, as well as what I mean exactly when I say writing an article. So first, let's examine a technical definition that we can use to consider what writing an article should involve. Now, when we say an article in English, or when we say writing an article in English, we generally mean writing a work intended for a general audience, which is generally written for a magazine, journal, newspaper, etc. Now, again, these are written for a general audience, usually, and they can be formal or informal, depending on the context. So let's look at a few reasons why we write articles. So the first thing we primarily write articles for is to present an opinion or to provide arguments for or against an issue. Now this can include everything between book reviews and movie reviews to editorial articles where the author gives their opinion about a recent event. Many political news articles fall into this category. Now, the second way that we typically write articles is to describe an event or a place or people or an experience. These are also sometimes called feature articles or general news articles. These contain much more fact and generally don't have as much opinion from the author included in them. And lastly, we write articles to give suggestions or to give advice as to how to handle a certain situation, or it can really be advice or a suggestion on almost anything. However, no matter what the reason we're writing our articles, we structure them generally the same way. The structure of an article has four main parts that you should take into consideration. The first, and perhaps the most important in many ways, is an eye-catching title, or the title. Now, this is the part of the article that makes you want to read it. If I'm reading through a website, for example, The Guardian, and I'm looking through articles and trying to decide what I should read, the title is what tells me if an article is going to be interesting or useful for me or not. As such, it is the introduction for your reader. It lets the reader know. It's like the first impression of what you have written, and as such, it needs to be good. Next, we have the introduction, followed by the main body and the conclusion. If this sounds very similar to essay writing, it's because in many ways it is. It's the same kind of format: introduction, main body, and conclusion. So, let's look at some examples of interesting titles and how to make an interesting title, since I mentioned before that this is so important. So, for example, if I have a title like How to Reach a Career Peak, or Mouth-Watering Dishes You Can Make at Home, or even Can Junk Food Be Healthy? Now, all of these will provide some degree of interest for your reader. And if your reader isn't interested in junk food, or they aren't interested in cooking, then they know that they can avoid this article and not waste their time on it. Now, moving on to the introduction. In the introduction, you should fully introduce and you should fully define the topic which you are going to be speaking about. Here, again, there should be no surprises. Everything should be clear, and you should also try to keep the reader's attention. The main body usually consists of 2 to 3 paragraphs in a normal article. Some articles, for example, some articles in magazines may be longer. However, 2 to 3 paragraphs is the norm. And here you will develop your topic in more detail. You'll provide more information. You'll explain your argument more if you have an argument. And finally, in the conclusion, you will summarize the info included in the main body, and depending on the kind of article, you may also make some comments or provide some recommendations about actions that your audience should take in the future. However, before we can do any of this, there's one more thing that we need to consider. we should think about who our target audience is. Who are we writing for? Who will be reading this article? Where will this article appear? For example, in a newspaper, in a magazine, on a blog. Likewise, it's also necessary to define the aim of the article. Are you writing an editorial piece? Are you giving your opinion? Are you writing a descriptive piece? Are you informing your audience? Are you giving advice? Because all of these things are going to determine your writing style. Now, after this, you're going to want to determine what info you will use for your article and organize your ideas into paragraphs. Likewise, it's important that you should, like in all writing, use language appropriate for your target audience. For example, linking words and expressions should be used because these will make your writing seem more natural, more coherent, and more easy to read. Likewise, you should also remember not to use overly emotional or overly personal language. And depending on the kind of article, you may also want to avoid language that is too formal, like you would use for essays. If you use elements of grammar like rhetorical questions or other means of developing arguments, you should be sure not to misuse them. And finally, remember not only to talk about yourself. You can express your point of view and your conclusion in some kinds of writing. However, you should try to stay to facts and general information for the most part. Now, in writing articles, it is also sometimes okay to talk to your reader directly. And this is mainly used for editorial writing or for writing reviews, but it is also sometimes used in writing features or writing about people, just a little bit less commonly. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about using these structures. However, when we talk to our readers, we may say things like, "I'm sure you'll agree that," or "I bet you don't," "Many of us hope," "Why not give it a try?" In these expressions, we're generally talking to our reader, and in some cases, talking to your reader is okay. Now that you know the main rules of writing an article, let's try to write and structure one together. And today, I think I want to talk about the role of computers and technology in our modern, fast-paced world, and our dependence on this technology. So first, we need to identify our reader. Now, our reader is going to be a direct conversation with a wide audience of people who spend too much time on computers, or in front of computers, or working with computers. So that means that we're talking to almost everyone, right? We'll try to attract our reader's attention with a title, and we're going to formulate our title like an open question. For example, are we too dependent on computers? There is also another format for titles, which I can use here, and we informally call it the colon format. And in this case, all I would make is a simple statement or a small phrase, for example, fast-paced technology, colon, are we too dependent on computers? These both are the same, and it's really a personal preference as to which one you want to use. Myself, I like the colon style. It's like an introduction. It builds more interest in your title. However, just asking a question is completely fine. Now, to heighten our reader's interest, we may provide a quotation before the start of our article. Recently, I found the following one. "Technology is a queer thing. It brings you great gifts with one hand and it stabs you in the back with the other." And this quote is from Carrie Snow. Now, this is pretty interesting, and it really summarizes, it lets the reader know kind of what my article is going to be about. So it's okay if I include it at the beginning. Now, the aim of our article here is to talk about the influence of modern technologies on people and discuss whether or not it's good or bad and what ways there are for using it for good. So we should think of a topic sentence which can be expanded into a whole paragraph now. For example, there's no doubt about our dependence on technology in developed countries. This is a general topic sentence. This is going to be the subject of my paragraph. But now let's expand this into an entire paragraph. And we'll do it kind of like this. Few of us would be able to live without computers, mobile phones, and all sorts of gadgets, at least not without completely changing our lifestyle. It seems the majority of job vacancies can only be filled by people who know a little about how to use modern gadgets, equipment, and computer software. The question is whether or not this dependency has a negative effect on us, either individually as a society. So first, I take my topic sentence and then I explain. And I provide more information, almost just like I would do if I were talking to you about it. Except here, I'm writing to you about it. Now, if we extract one of the ideas out of this paragraph, it's also to form a plan for our article, based on the following topic sentences. So we have our introduction and paragraph 1, which we've already discussed, our dependence on technology in developed countries and its effect. But in my introduction, I also discussed more points. For example, for the topic of paragraph 2, I can say, well, we have some advantages for modern technology, really. And for paragraph 3, I can also discuss the potential of modern technologies for improving our lives. Things completely unthinkable earlier now have become reality for us. And in my 4th paragraph, I can also mention that not all of these effects are good. Now, an excellent way to organize these is using an outline format. Paragraph 1 and a short explanation. Paragraph 2 and a short explanation. Paragraph 3, you get the idea. And this plan will give me a mental map of what my essay should look like, or what my article in this case should look like. It just helps me mentally plan my article so that when I finish writing, everything looks much neater. Finally, we'll conclude in paragraph 5 by talking about the ways we use modern technologies and our goals and tasks when we use them. Now, since we've already written the introduction, let's move on to writing the 2nd paragraph. And the 2nd paragraph, we're going to formulate a little bit like this. The invention of computers and internet revolutionized our lives in such a way that modern society lives in a much faster and more efficient way, which generations before us could only have dreamt of. Technology has a huge positive effect on our lives, and we can see the advantages of modern technology in our everyday life. Students around the world can find important information for their studies or research in the internet, and our 2nd paragraph is a little bit longer than this. You can find the full text in the files which accompany the lesson. So now, let's move on to paragraph 3. And in the 3rd paragraph, we're also going to write about some of the ways by which technology has improved our lives. So, let's look at how we do this. Technological inventions have a great potential for improving our lives, even more if they're developed in the right way. It should be noted that the pace of technological development is incredible. Mark Dean, IBM's chief technology officer in the Middle East and Africa, in his interview with The Economist says, "When I helped design the PC, I didn't think I'd live long enough to witness its decline. The computer, which seemed a real miraculous invention not so long ago, is gradually but steadily becoming outdated. The same as the typewriter, for instance." And again, the full paragraph is in the files which accompany the lesson. So let's move on to the 4th paragraph, where we discuss the disadvantages of technology. And highlight that this issue is really the most important paragraph of the main body, because here it shows a contrast. However, not all of the effects technology has on the way people learn, work, and communicate with each other have been positive. Public places, which in the past might have been full of people talking and making friends, are now usually populated by individuals, each in their own world created by their smartphones. It seems that many people no longer feel comfortable communicating with others without thousands of miles of cyberspace between them. Here, I'm drawing attention to the problems. And also notice that I'm changing my sentence structures a little bit as I go. I'm using a varied sentence structure as I write. And this makes my reading or makes my writing more interesting. It helps keep my reader interested. So be sure to do this when you write, and be sure to not repeat a sentence structure too often. Again, my rule is that you should never repeat the same sentence structure in the same paragraph, and you would do well to remember this. Now, finally, let's draw a conclusion which summarizes everything and presents a critical analysis of the main body of our article. To draw a conclusion, it is surely not technology itself that causes problems, nor our dependence on it, but rather the way in which we use it. Our main goal is to find ways of using technology that work with and help us develop, rather than suppress, the way we use our minds. If it is used to improve and not replace our everyday life, technology can be really beneficial for our learning, our work, and our social lives. Here, I'm critically analyzing everything that I've written in the body. I'm not just summarizing it. I'm summarizing it and I'm adding my analysis, and I'm adding that final point which ties everything together. It's like the ribbon on a Christmas present. Now, again, you can read the full article in the attachments to this lesson, and I would suggest to you that you should try to write your own article and share your experience doing it in the chat. Also, if you want more examples of how to write articles in English and how to write articles well in English, I would highly suggest looking at both the BBC News website and The Guardian, the international newspaper, The Guardian, both of which have won many awards for their journalism and for their writing. So these are both excellent sources if you want more examples on how to write and structure an article in English. Now, both of these will be primarily for an online format, so they likely won't help you much if you're thinking about writing for newspapers or magazines. But the most common type of article now is the online article. So again, these may be quite useful for you. So that's all for today. Again, practice this on your own, and I'll see you in the next lesson.